listening to TheESP, the European Skeptics Podcast, an independent weekly show set out to bring you news, interesting topics and interviews with people mostly from Europe, building bridges and breaking down language barriers to show the world how active and awesome the skeptical movement is in the region. This is episode 538. I'm your host, András Pinter, and joining me for the show is my co-host, Pontus Pokes. See ya.
Hejsan, András. Welcome back home.
Thank you, for a couple of days, that is.
I can see on the background that you're not in the obscure hotel, but it's still hot, isn't it, right? In Hungary at the moment?
Is.
Yeah?
In the room that I'm currently sitting in, it's around 28 degrees. Mm-hmm. Outside, it's already above 30. And
and it's 7 o'clock in the morning.
It's 7 o'clock in the morning, yes,
wow. My God.
That's correct. Yeah. But I've seen the weather forecast and it looks like it's going to go down a couple of degrees in the next 2 days or so.
Yeah.
I'm very hopeful. But still, it's bad.
Yes, I experienced the highest temperature I have ever experienced in Sweden last Saturday. We had 36 degrees.
And that is the highest you've ever experienced ever anywhere?
No, but in Sweden.
Okay.
And that's, of course, not an official thing because it was my own. But I had two different thermometers, different places, both in the shadow, and they both showed 36 degrees. If it had been officially recorded, it would have been. It's higher than the official record for my city ever. So it was very hot. Wow. Then, of course, we had a 12-hour thunderstorm, continuous lightning for 12 hours. Unfortunately, just a little bit of rain. We could have used a bit more rain, but didn't. So it's settling down a bit now. It's currently around 25 to 28 during these couple of days. But this is really bad. I mean, thousands of people have died in Europe just over the last weekend. In France alone, it was at least 1,000 people. And some say the count will go up because the government or the authorities, they are overwhelmed with the situation and the statistics may lag a bit. And the morgues in Paris were way over capacity. They had to ship corpses outside the city because they couldn't handle it. Similar in Spain, 1,000 people died in June due to heat waves. And it's the same in many, many countries in Europe. There's a new analysis by scientists from the World Weather Attribution Group, or whatever, it's a group or organization, the WWA. And that analysis says that due to global warming, a similar heat wave in June would have been 3.5 degrees cooler during the day if it happened in 1976. And it would have been 2 degrees cooler if it happened in 2003. So the heat waves have always happened, but they are getting worse due to the climate crisis. In related news, EU's Copernicus Climate Service reports that oceans are warmer than ever before recorded at this time of year on June 21st. The average global sea surface temperatures reached 21 degrees Celsius, just above the previous record, which was in 2024. It's about 1.5 degrees higher than the 1991 to 2020 June averages. So, what can I say? I mean, we talk about it every week now, but how can we not? This is happening right now.
And this is something that we have to tackle. We have to be ready for those changes. And many of us are not, including myself, actually. In the last couple of days, in the last week or so, I've been in Italy, southern Italy specifically. And due to the nature of my work, I had to be outside under the sun for hours on end with elderly people. So some of them, I was very happy for them to have made that decision, but some of them decided not to come to some of the parts of the program because they just didn't want to risk it. And I totally understood. It's an unfortunate thing because they went there to see stuff. But if it's unbearable, if it's something that can potentially kill you, especially if you have any cardiovascular diseases, if you have blood pressure problems, or if you're just an elderly people with more sensitivity to stuff like that, it's potentially dangerous.
Yeah. It's a big responsibility for you. What do you have plans? I guess you have plans for if anything would happen? You must
well, I constantly remind them to use sunscreens, put on clothing, put on hats, caps, whatever of them can have them ready for that, and constantly drink water.
Yeah.
Hydration is one of the most important things in a situation like this. And that's all I can do. Yeah. And remind them that if they feel dizzy, if they feel something is not right, first of all, let me know. Secondly, try to find a shade somewhere and sit down and don't risk it. And it has happened on occasion. The rest is where you said, you asked me if I had any contingency plans. Well, no, my job is about winging it on when something happens. So really, I mean, no, I'm prepared, but you can only prepare for so much. So if something terrible happens, if something needs to be dealt with from a medical point of view, I just have to improvise on the situation, how to deal with it, find medical help, stuff like that. Yeah, I could tell you a lot of stories about how this can end, but fortunately, so far, nobody has died on any of my tours, which cannot be told by some of my colleagues.
Wow.
Oh, unfortunately. Yeah. So, to everyone, take care of yourselves.
Hydrate.
Please don't risk it. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, good news to start with, right?
Yes, very cheerful.
We really started very high.
Yeah.
So I think this week we're going to have to be a little bit more lighthearted on the topic.
I'll do my best.
And if I wanted to use like a brilliant segue to this week's TWISH, I would say that, we would probably need some outside help because we seem to be killing ourselves with our planet.
Very cheerful.
So
yes.
We should probably leave this planet. And if aliens are coming around, we should try to hitchhike. Yeah, you know what? This segue is not working. So let me just go on and introduce This Week in Skeptical History, also known as TWISH. All right, so on the 1st of July, 1965, a lavender farmer from Provence in France unwittingly became the center of one of Europe's most enduring UFO tales. The story of Maurice Mas and the so-called Valençol encounter has since been retold in countless books, documentaries, and UFO magazines, but when we look at the evidence with a critical eye, and that's what we do as skeptics, the case becomes far less otherworldly than its reputation suggests. So, Maurice Mas claimed that early that morning, while tending his fields near Valençol, he noticed a strange object, roughly the size of a small car, he says, resting among the lavender rows. Well, just probably sleeping or something. Sleeping on a lavender field is pretty cool. I would love to try that once. According to his account, he described them as child-sized, with large heads, smooth skin, and oddly shaped eyes. What a surprise. No UFO encounter brings that image up, right?
It's because they're real, like that's what they look like.
Yeah, that's what they look like. He's a very curious man, so he tried to approach, and when he did that, one of the beings allegedly pointed a device at him, instantly immobilizing him. Now, that is obviously science fiction territory. Mas said he remained conscious but unable to move as the beings inspected the plants, then re-entered their craft, which rose silently and disappeared. Well, the story started spreading quickly. Local gendarmes investigated, and newspapers across France ran sensational headlines, obviously. The case soon attracted the attention of early UFO researchers who treated Mas as a highly credible witness, a respected farmer, a former military man, and, crucially, someone who insisted he had no interest in publicity. Well, we just have to take his word for it, right? It's that's what makes a credible witness. Especially that he even claimed that the encounter left him with lingering fatigue and a sudden aversion to violence, details that helped cement the narrative of a gentle extraterrestrial visitation.
Was he very violent before this? What's happening here?
Well, he was in the military, so...
okay.
Well,
right?
Yeah. Okay, let's see what the story looks like from a skeptical point of view. First, the physical evidence was, well, underwhelming. Investigators reported a shallow depression in the soil and some wilted lavender plants, and those are effects that could easily be explained by agricultural machinery or some kind of compaction of the soil or even natural plant stress. No radiation, no unusual chemical traces, and no mechanical residues were ever found. But unfortunately, there is no agreement among the accounts as to how much investigation did actually happen in terms of physical signs and traces. It's one thing that they have never been found, but the other question is how much was actually looked for. So most of the headlines were sensational, very much focusing on the spoken account of masses. But it's not really a real investigation that was going on. Well, secondly, Maurice Mass's account seems to have changed over time. So, and that is normal. I mean, the more you tell a story, it will transform into something else. Every single time you tell a story, it changes somewhat. And finally, early interviews were brief and vague, but later retellings of the same story grew more elaborate, adding new details about the being's behavior and the craft's appearance. So this is a classic case of fabrication of memories for yourself. So that is pretty cool. I mean, from a psychological point of view, it's pretty cool that this is happening to us.
Yeah. Just to clarify, when we say fabrication, not necessarily conscious fabrication. It's what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more like confabulation. I think you are trying to make sense of everything you experienced. Yeah, it's not a conscious conning.
Well, not necessarily.
Activity.
Anyway. Yeah.
Not necessarily, but it could well be happening without consciously trying to deceive people. And then, after a while, he began refusing interviews, claiming the experience was too sacred to discuss. And that was an attitude that made critical examination nearly impossible. But there's a third thing. Psychological explanations fit the evidence far better than extraterrestrial ones. So Maurice Mass had been working long hours during harvest season, alone in the fields, under considerable stress, which you don't necessarily associate with lavender, but still.
Maybe he didn't hydrate enough.
Probably not, yes. So several researchers, including French skeptics and psychologists, suggested that he may have experienced a vivid hypnagogic or waking dreamlike episode, possibly triggered by fatigue or dehydration. Others pointed out that Provence in the 1960s was already fertile ground for flying saucer stories. And I think we have featured a couple of those on this show as well. Mass was known to enjoy reading science fiction magazines, so that's not difficult to get to those stories from the basis of reading science fiction. And the case's longevity owes more to repetition than to evidence. UFO literature often cites Valençol as a classic landing case, but rarely engages with the weaknesses of the testimony or the lack of corroboration of claims. When later investigators revisited the site, they found no trace of anything unusual, only a community proud of its local legend, and that's basically it. So, after 60 years, not much remains of the Valençol incident. There's a single witness, inconsistent testimonies, no physical evidence, and a narrative that was massively shaped by cultural expectations of the UFO era. So, yeah, I think it's worth mentioning on This Week in Skeptical History because it is important in the history of UFO encounters, but it's definitely not proof of extraterrestrial visitors. It's rather a reminder of how human perception and storytelling can transform something into a myth.
Which is very interesting.
It is fascinating, but not to be taken too seriously. I mean, the accounts themselves.
Right.
All right. That means that we are moving on to the news.
I think listeners will not be surprised to hear that I have concerns about politicians ignoring science when they put together their policies. I tend to mention that from time to time.
Yes.
There's a Swedish psychologist called Magnus von Kampenhausen. Can you believe that name? That's not very Swedish name, but I really think it's pretty powerful. Magnus von Kampenhausen. Okay, well,
sounds,
anyway.
Germanic in a way.
Yes, probably has some German.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. That's not the point of the story.
Okay.
He says in a statement that if unemployment, crime, and integration problems are to be reduced, science says that efforts must be directed at the underlying social conditions rather than blaming crimes on quote-unquote values. But politicians, according to him, ignore this fact and very commonly talk about people's values as an important factor when it comes to crime. And very often they indicate that this is related to values that are alien to our society. You can hear where this is going. The problems are the foreigners, right?
Oh, always.
Yeah. Foreign values lead to more crimes. This guy says that's not backed up by science. Obviously, people have values depending their cultural and even religious backgrounds that can be different from each other. Nobody can deny that. But when you hear certain politicians argue for tighter immigration regulations and harder punishments, they often use cultural differences as a reason to keep the borders shut or to send everybody back to where they come from, quote unquote. According to von Kampenhausen, science clearly shows that human behavior is influenced by situations, relationships, emotions, and living conditions rather than by values. Under the influence of stress, strong emotions, social pressure, power, powerlessness, helplessness, people will very well act in ways that conflict with their ideals and their values. He points out that people, of course, are responsible for their own lives and their own actions. Laws and rules must be followed, but the role of politics cannot be to try to instill the quote-unquote right values in people. Instead, what politicians should do is to create more and better opportunities, make sure that people have a way of making a living, things like that. Problems arise when people do not have sufficient reasonable conditions and opportunities to live a good and secure life. This may sound a lot like a very left-wing position to take. I can hear people critiquing this is politics, this is not science. Well, it is science.
And you're a commie.
Yeah, I'm a commie as well, but this is science. This is science versus opportunistic politicians. Politicians advocate for policies that appeal to the voters. Policies that will get them elected or re-elected. Politicians who promote policies that don't sit well with the voters, they don't get elected. So how do we fix this? As I've said before, in my opinion, we can't really blame the sitting politicians. If we live in a democracy, we are the ones who put them there. And I usually say this. I mean, we get the politicians we deserve. We voted for these guys. The only way, in my opinion, out of this is to have a better educated public. Voters that can see through populism and understand how science works. And the only way to achieve that is through education. In the skeptic movement, we are all about education, informing people, including ourselves, about how science works and how you generally come to the wrong conclusions if your understanding is shallow. So, you try to take shortcuts in your reasoning, and that's natural and normal, but we should be aware of it and we should educate people so that they can look out for it when it happens.
Yeah, and you remember that you gave the Really Right Award to the European Commission last week. Mm-hmm. So that was an example of how science-based policies should work. It should be the result of consultation with experts on a certain field, and not necessarily the general public. This is an important and long-lasting question of democracy, because obviously you want to give the people the power to vote on things and values that they hold near and dear to their heart. However, that's just one thing, because we can't expect the general public to have expert knowledge on all the different fields. So we should elect politicians who will definitely be science-minded enough so that they will consult with leading experts of fields that concern that decision. Okay, so I don't want referendums held on whether GMOs should be accepted or GMOs should be banned. I don't want that. I want the experts to sit down and put all the science together and present it to the decision makers, and the decision makers to be well versed in science in general so that they understand what they are presented with. And then they make a decision that will have an effect on all of us, but then that decision should be made responsibly. And that kind of responsibility is what we have to expect from our politicians. So I want to be able to vote for someone who has that attitude, who has that open mind and that science-minded approach. And that's it.
Yeah, but we still need to educate the public because...
We do.
I mean, we can't expect every voter to be an expert on every subject. But they need to know so much about science that they know when to trust what an expert is saying and say, okay, I don't understand this, but everything he says or they say, you shouldn't listen to just one, you should listen to the consensus. But what they are saying makes sense and I have to trust them. Or I can try to become an expert myself, but you should recognize when experts are talking in a way that makes sense. Even if you don't understand all the details, and you should learn to trust them. But of course, but we can't let the experts make all the decisions. It's still a democracy. We need to vote, but we need to give people the means to vote for the right politicians that make sense. And we should say it's not all bad news all the time. You mentioned, or we mentioned, European Commission last week. But we've seen also that after a long time of Viktor Orban in Hungary going after education systematically, trying to limit education, now there's a backlash and it seems to be going in the right direction again. And that there'll be a lot of work to fix everything that was broken, but at least there is hope. A lot of right-wing parties depend on people being ignorant, right? So they can set the agenda and tell what is true. And that's why they are so hostile towards education and information.
I don't want to single out right-wing parties. It's populism, I think, mostly. It can happen in both throughout the political spectrum.
Correct. That's right.
That populist ideas can emerge. Why we tend to link it to right-wing politics is because one of the fields, one of the areas that can easily slip into populism is nationalistic policies. So nationalism can very easily slip into very far-right attitudes. And this is why we tend to associate the two, but it's not necessarily exclusively right-wing politics.
No, but we have a lot of examples on it happening on the
yes.
I almost said on the right side, but on the right-wing side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, don't forget to always look on the bright side of life, whatever side you're on. Okay, I'd like to bring in a very good example of why education of the general public is very important into the scientific field.
Ooh.
It's been a long while since we spoke last time about Boiron.
Yeah.
Which is the French multinational company, long the global number one in homeopathic remedies. I think in some aspects it's number two, but never mind. Mm-hmm. It's a leading manufacturer of homeopathic
sugar pills
products and sugar pills. But they seem to be abandoning the very product that made them famous. It looks like Boiron has sharply reduced any mention of homeopathy on its Spanish social media since late 2024. Mm-hmm. Shifting instead of to dietary supplements and intimate care products and eye drops. So the move seems to be coming as homeopathy sales in Spain have collapsed by nearly 38% since 2022, falling from 3.6 million to 2.2 million units sold. And that is always good news from a skeptical point of view. Yeah. But this looks like it's not just a Spanish trend. Boiron's worldwide revenue has dropped from 604 million euros in 2018 to 501 million in 2025. So that's like 1/6 of its revenues gone in about 7 years, which is pretty good, especially because these companies have a goal to expand and to grow constantly. And instead, it looks like their revenue has been in a decline. Good news. So this has been driven by shrinking homeopathy markets across Europe. And I'm pretty sure that has a lot to do with skeptics actively criticizing homeopathy in the public eye. Countries that once financed these pseudo-treatments, including the UK and France, have already pulled support, and Germany plans to follow this year. So that is pretty cool, and I would like to praise all those people being very active in fighting those fights. One name comes to mind right away, that's Michael Marsh, who... As we know from the introductory video of QED from 1 year, I think I'm paraphrasing here, but he single-handedly ended homeopathy in the UK and on the NHS. So, well, even if it's a bit of an exaggeration, the single-handedly part, but it's not far from the truth. But going back to Spain and the situation in Spain, because this is based on an El País article, Spain's Ministry of Health recently reaffirmed what scientific evidence has shown for decades, that homeopathy does not outperform placebo, has no scientific basis, and can endanger patients when used instead of real medical treatment. And that is very powerful when the Ministry of Health tells you something like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point this happened here in Hungary as well with our new Ministry of Health. I'm still waiting for that to happen, but I think we will probably push things like that in the future with the Hungarian skeptics. Just for a bit more context, Boiron has spent decades cultivating an image of scientific legitimacy. They were boasting thousands of raw material stocks, strict quality controls of producing sugar pills, and a global workforce of more than 2,700 employees, which is, well, if you think about it, for a manufacturer of remedies, this is not that huge. It means that they don't need a huge workforce globally to produce those nonsense pills. It's obvious that it doesn't require a huge workforce. But behind the polished branding lies a product line built on 200-year-old ideas that contradict basic biochemistry, like cures like extreme dilutions and the claim that water retains a memory of substances long after no molecules remain. That is just ridiculous. The turning point for homeopathy's credibility came in 2005 when The Lancet published its landmark editorial, The End of Homeopathy, urging the scientific community to stop wasting resources on a therapy that had failed every serious test of efficacy. And since then, skeptical organizations across Europe have pushed regulators and health systems to act, and the market has steadily eroded. Well, to go back to the initial part of this, Boiron appears to be repositioning itself as a wellness supplement company, tapping into a booming sector. It's just a minefield, I think, of crazy ideas as well. They are tapping into a booming sector with looser regulation and more permissive marketing rules. So it's an understandable move. But obviously we have to warn that while supplements contain active ingredients, many of their health claims remain scientifically weak still. And that raises concerns that the company is simply swapping one evidence-poor business model for another just to stay afloat and keep the company alive.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah. But I think we can see that as a sign that homeopathy's long retreat from mainstream healthcare is accelerating.
That's good.
Well, it's probably a bit of wishful thinking on my part as well. But, well, if it's happening even among its most entrenched industry champions, I think there's hope.
Yeah. Well, speaking of wishful thinking, we all are subject to certain biases, right? It's just something that we have to accept and try to acknowledge. The more we are aware of this, the smaller the risk is that we get misled by our own biases. But how about AI? Do AI models have biases? Without looking at the data, it would seem reasonable to assume that since these large language models or AI chatbots are trained on text produced by humans, they would mirror that. So the AI chatbots would reflect the biases of humans. But let's have a look at what really happens. All AIs are not the same. There are differences in algorithms, what data they are trained on, and what safeguards that have been built into them or not. I would say that out of the most well-known chatbots, Grok probably has the worst reputation, in my opinion. I don't use it myself, so this is second-hand information. But Grok, of course, is the chatbot in X, and we tend to blame Elon Musk for not regulating it enough, and perhaps sometimes he is accused of introducing misinformation directly into Grok, which it's very hard to prove. It can look like that sometimes, but that could be just our own imaginations. A Swedish investigative TV program called Kalla Fakta, which means cold facts, they decided to put Grok to the test. And they actually found some quite horrible results. One of the journalists in question bluntly said that some of the things that they got back from Grok would probably be illegal for a person to say or spread, since it was libelous or illegal hate speech against an ethnic group, which is a type of crime in Sweden that you can get prosecuted for. Grok, in their tests, produced anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, tips on psychoactive mushrooms, and help in how to write suicide notes and other things like that. In one conversation, Grok painted a picture of Jewish networks having allowed Muslims into Sweden, and it said, quote, "Muslims are the visible enemy on the street. The Jewish networks are the invisible enemy within the institutions that made this situation possible in the first place." End quote. Pretty horrible stuff. And rather predictably, XAI, which is the company behind it, did not reply to questions about this. But that's just an example. But then the Washington Post recently did something else. They decided to test several of the major chatbots for political biases. The Post investigation came after several previous academic studies had found that AI models often tend to favor left-leaning positions. And that was a surprise to me. Maybe that's my own bias, right? I would have expected chatbots to be right-wing biased rather. But let's look at the data and see what they found. The AI models were asked to answer each of these questions. They had a number of questions, and they were instructed to reply in 30 words without personalization settings turned on. So trying to make it as neutral as possible. They also put these questions 5 times to each chatbot because you get slightly different results every time. And then a reporter reviewed the responses and gave it a score to describe whether the bots gave a left-leaning position, a right-leaning position, or both, more balanced. Of course, that is a subjective thing for that journalist to make a judgment about, but what can you do? But the results were that the Post actually concluded that most of the chatbots were left-leaning. They asked questions on the 30 different topics. The examples of these topics were climate policy, DEI programs, death penalty, free speech, gun control, unions, and universal income, things like typically is polarized. And of course, this is US-centric, but we use the same chatbots over here, of course. And the results were that ChatGPT gave left-leaning arguments only on 80% of the questions, or in the replies. So 80% of the time, they gave only the left-leaning point of view.
Wow.
So that's quite a lot. They were the most left-leaning. Only in 3% of the replies, they only gave the right-leaning position. And 17% they were balanced. They gave both. They said, well, on the one hand, you can say this. On the other hand, you can say that. And that counted as a both sides reply. Mm-hmm. DeepSeek were very left-leaning as well, 70%. And all of them were, even XIA, so Grok, gave 40% only left-leaning arguments, and only in 33% they gave right-leaning arguments, and then some were balanced. So they were the most right-wing, but it wasn't only. They were more left-leaning than right-wing, which is surprising. And I don't know exactly how good this test was. I'm not an expert on how to design these tests, but it's a kind of indication. And the results did agree with previous academic studies. So I guess if we sometimes feel that these chatbots are overly right-leaning, which I can certainly feel sometimes, perhaps that shows my bias, right? And I think I'm right in saying that left-leaning answers tend to be more grounded in science. That's my excuse. Than right-wing talking points, but I don't know. But I feel a little bit more informed, and I will look at my AI replies a little differently in the future, and seeing if they are making me more left-leaning than I should be. I don't know. It made me think anyway.
Again, you're a commie.
Probably. Oh boy, people will totally get the wrong idea of what my political leanings are, but that's fine. Whatever.
No, I don't claim to know your political leanings, but I think when it comes to political ideas and arguments, I've known you to be quite a balanced thinking person.
So you're a commie too, yeah? Okay.
Yes, I'm a commie too. Yeah, I don't support your faults, yeah, because I tend to agree with them and. Well, which is a thing. Actually, that is a thing. But yeah, we are actively trying to avoid that as skeptics,
as much as we can.
Okay, one thing you should also avoid is conversion therapies.
Oh, I haven't done any of those for a long time.
Okay, good. Not me neither. But what you did on episode 536 was giving the European Commission the really wrong award for not doing anything or not doing enough against conversion therapies on the European Union level. For those who are not familiar with these, conversion therapies are practices. Well, it's interventions. It's a broad set of harmful and discredited interventions aimed at changing, suppressing, or curing a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. And we have to mention that these practices can include pseudo-psychological counseling, coercive prayer sessions, exorcisms even, and other forms of pressure or abuse, often targeting young and vulnerable people. And survivors consistently report long-term trauma, shame, and psychological harm. And major medical and human rights organizations have repeatedly stressed that these practices have no therapeutic value and constitute abuse, and as such, they should be banned. Well, yes. As I mentioned, the European Union failed to do that and go against that specifically. But the UK seems to have taken a long-awaited and significant step toward outlawing those conversion practices. In England and Wales, the government has finally published its draft conversion practices bill, which is a milestone that campaigners have awaited for years. Humanist UK welcomed the bill as a historic step, emphasizing that any effective ban must cover both sexual orientation and gender identity, apply to medical and non-medical settings, and avoid loopholes based on religious freedom or supposed consent. The organization also stresses that ethical, non-directive counseling, support that helps people explore their identity without pushing them toward any predetermined outcome, must remain fully protected. And that's the main thing about conversion therapies. They claim to know what the outcome of a person's sexual orientation and gender identity should be, and they try to push them toward that. And that is just outright wrong. But we are commies, so that's why we are. We're saying that. And the publication of the draft bill in England and Wales follows years of stalled promises and mounting evidence that conversion practices remain a real and growing problem. Amnesty International UK recently found that several Christian charities promoting such practices saw their income surge by 165% between 2019 and 2023, reaching nearly £2 million. So that is huge. So apparently people respond to that with their wallets. And Humanist UK has repeatedly raised the issue, even at the UN, highlighting the severe harms that it can cause, and as such, a need for a comprehensive ban. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, progress is also accelerating. A private member's bill, the Conversion Practices Criminalisation Bill, has been introduced at the Northern Ireland Assembly by the Alliance Party deputy leader, Eoin Tennyson. If someone can tell me how to pronounce that, please do. Eoin Tennyson.
Mm-hmm.
So Northern Ireland humanists welcome the move, calling it an incredibly positive step forward and urging lawmakers to ensure the ban is clear, comprehensive and free of religious exemptions, just as in the case of the England and Wales bill.
Yeah. So what a pity that the UK left the EU, otherwise they could drive these policies on an EU level.
Well, we could still hope that they could do that even from the outside, in a way, leading by example. I can only hope. So these developments mark a major shift across the UK. After years of delay, symbolic motions and failed legislative attempts, both Westminster and Stormont are now moving toward concrete legal protections. Humanists UK and Northern Ireland humanists say they will continue working with lawmakers to ensure the final laws are strong, enforceable, and fully inclusive for both gay and trans people. So, yeah.
Good news. Finally.
It is indeed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Speaking of good news, my understanding is we are about to find out who's been really right lately.
Indeed. Another really right this week. And this one is long overdue. Perhaps this should have been the first award we gave out on the first episode when we started this show back in 2015. And I'll explain. A new report says that thanks to the prevalence of the HPV vaccine in the UK, and the HPV vaccine targets the human papillomavirus, which is the leading cause of cervical cancer. But because of the prevalence of the HPV vaccine, cervical cancer has caused no deaths among young women in the UK so far this year. Not a single one. If you look statistically and historically, cervical cancer typically would have killed nearly 24 women in the same time period. That was the past. Now we live in the future where people can get protection. So that's great. The bad news, because there is a bad news as well, is that the vaccine take-up is now going down, it's typically the problem. When a disease tends to go away, then people stop protecting themselves because they don't feel that it's a problem anymore. They stop worrying about it. So please, people, take your shots. They work. We have science on our side. So I want to celebrate this. And what has produced the HPV vaccine, Andras?
It was science.
Science, indeed. Yes, science. Therefore, science gets today's award for being really right. The very application of science can save lives, and that is one reason that science is such a great thing. Yes, it is.
And we'll love it for it. Mm-hmm. Okay, but we are also biased towards it. and we're happy to be that. I mean, I don't mind being called biased towards science, but there's a reason for that. It has developed in me for some reason, and the very reason is how effective it is. So it's really cool. All right, and that is the way to go about learning everything about the world. Yes, but that brings us to the final part of the show. And before we do that, I'd like to encourage everyone to get in touch, get us feedback. And if you come across on any of the podcasting platforms or social media platforms, you come across our content, please don't forget to share. Please don't forget to subscribe and encourage others to do so as well. And if you want to give us some further help, you could leave us reviews. You could give us 5 stars on all the different platforms. Or you can help us with a little bit of financial aid as well.
Yes, so if you love science the way we do, you should go to patreon.com/TheESP and see if you could chip in a little bit and help us do what we are doing. We really, really are very grateful to people who are doing that already. And we can always use a little cash too, because a lot of the time anyway, we still do this out of pocket. We pay for the privilege of doing this, but some compensation would be good so we can get a little bit of the money back that we put into this. And all the time, of course.
Yeah, and we're not going to get rich doing this, but this is not the reason why we're doing it. So it's really about supporting our work. And whoever has done so in the past or doing so constantly, we are eternally grateful. But it's not only us who appreciate science very much. And as the final part of the show is always a quote, let's see who else shares our views. And this week's quote comes from British comedian, actor, writer, and director, and just outright famous guy, mostly for being an atheist, but also a huge supporter of science. And that is Ricky Gervais. And see what he has said in an interview. Science seeks the truth, and it does not discriminate. For better or worse, it finds things out. Science is humble. It knows what it knows, and it knows what it doesn't know. It bases its conclusions and beliefs on hard evidence, evidence that is constantly updated and upgraded. It doesn't get offended when new facts come along. It embraces the body of knowledge. It doesn't hold on to medieval practices because they are tradition. If it did, you wouldn't get a shot of penicillin. You'd pop a leech down your trousers and pray.
Yes, that's a good quote.
I think it is. But with that, we are concluding this episode. So I'd like to thank you, Pontus.
Thanks a lot.
Many, many thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Please keep doing so. And until next week, goodbye.
Hej då!
Visslat. This has been your ESP experience. The show is produced and recorded by TheESP.eu. Join us again next time, but until then, please send your feedback and comments to info@TheESP.eu. We would also love to hear your ideas and suggestions regarding topics, and if you have any skeptical news from any European country, we're always eager to hear about them. If you have an upcoming local event or an organization to promote, please don't hesitate to let us know, as we are more than happy to help. All music in the program was written and performed by Keisha J. Gray and George Robb and is used with their permission. Please check out our webpage for show notes and archive material at theesp.eu. Follow us on Blue Sky at theesp.bsky.social, like us on Facebook or support our work on patreon.com/theesp. And don't forget to spread the word by sharing our content with others.
I don't know how you can believe.
Two small humanoid beings stood beside it.
Wow.
He described them as chilled. He described, they were chilled, man.
Just chilling out.
And I wrote smooth skin, and I read smoking. Never mind. So they were chilled smoking. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
Would it? Okay, I just didn't want to derail your
no. Please derail me.
Okay, so
that says that thanks to the prevalence of the HPV vaccine in the UK, which is the leading. Sorry, that came out wrong. The vaccine is not the leading cause for cervical cancer.
No, it's not.
Yeah.